Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Wrestling Doesn't Make Sense. It's your favorite show on the internet where two guys talk about pro wrestling and whether or not it makes sense. And a lot of the time, it doesn't really. Today, we're going to be talking about the ratings, TV ratings. For a long time, wrestling has not necessarily depended on the TV ratings, but it's been a big part of the whole business, especially in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big deal in the 90s whenever WCW was going head to head with Monday Night Raw, and the ratings really showed just how huge that shit could be. You were seeing 8 million people watching wrestling on a Monday night. It was more than that, probably, right?
At one point, I think it was into double figures, so it was 10 million or more.
Which is crazy numbers whenever you hear the numbers we're about to reveal on today's show. Because we're going to break down some of the ratings between WWE and AEW. And for the hell of it, let's throw in TNA as well. Because, or Impact. I'm just going to call it TNA. Because fuck it. They started it. But, people seem to forget that TNA exists sometimes. And you're like, well, they were bringing it to WWE for a while. Not very well, but they did go head to head, and they were seen as an alternative for a while. So let's talk about TNA. But like we said, it's not quite the same as what it used to be.
No.
TNA, the Impact that we see today,
Yeah, it's kind of years of bad booking and whatnot have kind of damaged their reputation almost beyond repair. But to be fair to them, they've been doing a decent job in the last few years. Certainly since Scott D'Amore and Don Callis, when he was there as well, took over and kind of helped right the ship a little bit. And they've had some good buzz over the last couple of years, and obviously had some decent signings as well. So they're not really bad off, but in terms of ratings, they are way behind everyone else.
Yes, exactly. And again, you mentioned some of the previous bad booking and bad decisions that were made that led to that, to these ratings not being as high as maybe they should be, or at least as not as high as they used to be. And I feel like that works across the board. The WWE's ratings are not what they used to be.
Yeah.
And part of that is bad booking and just uninteresting stuff. And it's funny because if you look at the wrestling world today, right now, all the companies, you could say, feel free to dispute this, anybody, if you want. But I feel like, this is hardly going to be a controversial statement, but I feel like the most interesting storyline, the most consistent, probably the most fun storyline in all of wrestling this entire year has been the Roman Reigns stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Roman Reigns just being wonderful and working with the bloodline, as it were, and being the head of the table, as they say, on SmackDown. It's the most consistent, the most interesting. It's quite surprising to see something good come out of the WWE, right? But there it is. And to go along with that, we can both agree that it seems like the rest of the WWE product hasn't been as good as the Roman Reigns stuff.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Yes. So it's interesting that the WWE are arguably, although I don't think it's much of an argument, putting on the best storyline of the year, and at the same time also putting out a load of crap. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I'd see. I'm not sure I would say Roman Reigns is the best storyline of the year. I mean, it's been certainly a big part of SmackDown's success this year, and obviously they've kind of spun it in interesting ways as well, with Paul Heyman being his council and everything, and then that mixed in with Brock Lesnar, and
Yeah.
then before that, you had John Cena coming back, and I mean he's definitely stepped up to the plate and delivered. But in terms of like a gripping storyline, I don't think it's been that spectacular really.
Okay. But again, in the context of wrestling in 2021, what other storyline has gripped you more than that or been more interesting than that?
Well, this is where I struggle to kind of come up with something because
Exactly. And that again, like I said, it might not be like totally we can agree it's not totally perfect, but simply because there have been very few other totally really interesting and engaging storylines across the board, I feel like the Roman Reigns storyline is the best storyline of the year. I mean, that's what's TNA doing that's more interesting than that? We talked about the AEW storylines on a show a couple of weeks ago, where they're good at putting on matches. Certainly, they're good at getting interest and buzz going, but I don't think they're good at like actual long-term storylines. I don't think you could say the Kenny Omega Hangman Page storyline has been more fun or more interesting or engaging than the Roman Reigns stuff, because the Roman Reigns stuff still doesn't. We don't know how it's going to end. We still can't predict this. But as soon as the Hangman Page Kenny Omega storyline started, we all knew how it was going to end, and I felt like they left it so long, and they bungled a lot of the in betweens, that by the time you got to the end of the storyline, it was the right guy won in the end, but it wasn't such an effective storyline because of the missteps they made along the way, you know.
Yeah, I think it definitely wasn't as well booked as a lot of people have made it out to be.
Yeah.
That's for sure. I mean, there was definite lulls in the story and sort of missed opportunities as well. And
Yes.
but because people are so invested in Hangman Page, they were able to kind of overcome that and still keep the crowd. So when he did move back into that position where he was, finally gearing up to challenge Kenny Omega, it got good reactions and kind of overcame the fact that like it sort of limped over the finish line. But as long as people were still invested in it, you can't really argue with it, I guess.
I mean, we can because we did, right? There were definitely some missteps along the way and bumps in the road. So, they had good intentions, and it seemed like it could have like ended up as a really good storyline. But to me, it just fell a bit flat because of all the bumps in the road, And that goes for a lot of the other storylines in AEW as well. The stuff with Impact didn't seem to do anything, and we'll talk about that in a second when we look at the ratings. But the quote unquote opening the forbidden door didn't do a whole lot to get major interest in. CM Punk turning up wasn't a storyline, right? We're starting to see a storyline with CM Punk and MJF, and that could end up being a knockout hit of next year. But at the moment, we haven't seen nearly enough to say that that's the super engaging storyline of the year. So my point is, the WWE are at the same time probably putting out some of the better wrestling stuff of 2021, and at the same time putting out some real drac, some some of the worst stuff of 2021. It's funny how that works, whereas AEW they're just kind of flying on their own plane, you know what I mean? They're doing their own stuff, and they're just happy to see what works or what doesn't work. Like I said, I don't think they're super invested with like big actual storylines, but they are good at putting on individual matches and getting interest that way,
Yeah. It's more like it's not so much like the big long drawn out booking that they're good at. It's more the sort of kind of 2-3 week build for like hyping up a match and then doing that on Dynamite.
Yeah, exactly, on Dynamite. Now, this year we've seen the debut of a new AEW show called Rampage
Mm-hmm.
that we were a little skeptical about because, like we said, it didn't seem like they were good at the short-term booking, but it didn't seem like they were doing a whole lot of long-term storyline stuff on Dynamite anyway. So for them to add a second show seemed unnecessary, especially given the fact that they have 2 YouTube shows, which is just full of shit, right? Just plus all the other fucking being the elite and all the other backstage YouTube bullshit they have going.
Mm.
They require you to watch an awful lot of TV, which I have no interest in doing.
Yeah.
And then they thought, fuck it, we'll add a new television show to the network, the TNT network,
Mm-hmm.
named after the belt, I assume.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's that way around.
Yes, I think the belt came first, and then the network like, I like the sound of that.
Mm.
That sounds good. So we've got Rampage this year, and when it first debuted, we were a little skeptical, and we said, what we'll do is we'll give it a couple of months, and we'll have a look at the ratings near the end of the year. And this happens to be the end of the year, and we happen to have a big old list of ratings. So that's today's show. We're going to talk about the ratings for 2021 and see just how everything stacks up. So have you got ratings for the whole year or just for Rampage?
I've got a bunch of ratings basically from the whole time of the Wednesday Night War up
Ooh.
until now. So yeah,
Okay.
I've got a lot of ratings.
Wow. When did the quote unquote Wednesday Night War officially begin?
So that started at the start of October in 2019. So WWE moved NXT to, is it? I think it's the USA Network, isn't it? But they beat Dynamite to the punch by 2 weeks, so they kind of had a little bit of a head start moving onto the Wednesday nights on cable TV, and they sort of reaped the rewards of that to begin with, like getting over 1 million viewers for both of those shows. But then once AEW Dynamite debuted, that's when Dynamite kind of quickly took the lead and only really lost it a couple of times in terms of the total viewership over the course of the next 18 months or whatever.
Yeah, NXT, they struggled to keep the ratings up against Dynamite.
Yeah.
Which was interesting because it seemed like Dynamite was the newer show, the fresher show, and that's what people were watching and putting a lot of their attention to. And we thought that at the time NXT was the better show overall.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not so now.
No.
Now that we have NXT 2.0, the makeover that nobody asked for and that we got anyway. But NXT, the old NXT, seemed like a more coherent kind of like there was long-term storylines. You could see that they were building storylines to the next NXT takeover, and those were usually a couple of months apart. So they had plenty of time to kind of build up that stuff, and they usually did a very good job of building up stuff logically, and then having it conclude at the pay-per-view. So
and still having good matches just weekly on the show as well.
Yes, like it all kind of worked really well, and that was stuff that we just thought AEW weren't able to quite replicate,
Mm.
and the fans were like, fuck you guys, that wrestling doesn't make sense. We're not going to listen to you. We're going to do whatever we want. So I have ratings from the beginning of this year.
Mm-hmm.
I assume you have a lot of these ratings too.
Yeah.
So when did the Monday Night War, or what was it, Wednesday Night War?
Yes.
And again, quotation marks necessary for that because and I doubt it was much of a war. That's like a limp ass war,
Yeah.
When did that end?
So NXT moved to Tuesday nights on the 13th of April.
This year.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, April 13th. Okay. So I have some ratings up to that point. You can see NXT and Dynamite Like for example, the first week of the year, Dynamite had 662,000, whereas NXT had 641,000. They're pretty
Hmm.
close
Yeah, I mean, at that point, yeah.
at that point, and it seemed like the ratings would go up and down, but like in similar kind of. For example, the week after that, Dynamite went up to 762,000,
Hmm.
and NXT went down to 551,000. But it just seems like they're not. Neither show is gaining any new viewers. They're just swapping viewers between themselves.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
That's kind of what it felt like to me. So the numbers kind of stay relatively like that. A lot of it's like AEW Dynamite beating NXT, but just about. You know what I mean?
Um,
Not crazy, crazy, crazy numbers. Like even like if you look at let's say when is this near the last week of February, Dynamite had 934,000 viewers, which is pretty good.
hmm.
Like that's their highest one to that date to 2021 thus far, compared to NXT 692.
Yep.
You know, so again NXT pretty standard viewership for them. The Dynamite having a good decent number, but again 300,000 viewer difference. It's not that big.
Well,
I don't think
it's
it gets too
relative
big.
though, isn't it? Because like in terms of today's viewing audience, it's quite a big difference.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it gets too big till we get a little further down. So, for example, in April, you see Dynamite finally hitting over 1 million.
Yeah, that basically started happening as soon as they didn't have NXT going up against them.
Yeah. So April, yeah, that week of April. And NXT, respectable 805,000.
Yeah, again, because they moved to Tuesday nights, and so that was their first night unopposed as well. So that's sort of
Yeah.
an increase where, before that, a few weeks before that, they were doing like around 650 to
Yeah.
675,000.
So
So it
I
was a
think
big
it
jump.
yeah, exactly. So I think that like the viewership was pretty tight with the two of them, but once they went to Tuesday nights and AEW had more free time, it always seemed right pretty much from the beginning that AEW was ahead by a couple of 100,000, and
Mm,
that seemed pretty steady per week, right?
yeah.
This time there's a big jump of like close to 400,000, right?
Mm,
Same thing the next week. So now it seems like there is a bigger jump. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. But so we'll skip a couple of weeks there because the ratings stay pretty much around about the same mark. There's a couple of times whenever AW were like in May AW were like bumped.
yeah.
May and June.
Basically, yeah, all of May and June pretty much. So for the first, for the 13th and 20th of May, they were on Thursdays. And then from the 28th of May to the 18th of June, they were on Fridays. And then the 26th of June, they were on a Saturday. So that, like, it was a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 week period where they weren't in their, regular time slot at all. And that completely
Yes,
reflected in the ratings.
exactly. Their ratings like really fluctuated. Like we were saying, beginning of or middle of April they were up to 1 million, and then May June it was like all over the place. 400,000-500,000.
Mm.
Was but again that's because they switched days, and so back by July again they're back over 1 million.
Mm-hmm.
So I think these are good numbers here, like a wrestling company getting over 1 million. Because if you look at the flip side at the same time, let's say the middle of July, Raw is doing 1,900,000 kind of
Yeah.
numbers, and Dynamite was doing 1,100,000. So you're like, all right, like that seems like genuine competition right there. That seems like snapping at heels, snapping at Raw, which
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that we can all, as wrestling fans, agree. Sucks. Raw is a terrible show, especially since it was 3 hours long. But also on the flip side, it's their flagship show. It's the one that a lot of people know. And so to see AEW getting that close to Raw, even though we know that the quality of Raw has declined significantly, that seemed like big news, you know?
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
So then we're gonna go down a little bit further to August, whenever Rampage started out.
Mm-hmm.
Rampage debuted with 740,000 viewers,
Indeed.
which compared to NXT that week had 654,000, and Dynamite had 975,000, so just under a million for them. But you know, beating NXT, not really close to Raw or SmackDown, understandably.
Mm.
For reference, TNA had 126,000 week, which looks like a decent number for Impact, considering that like a month before that they were at like 69,000
Yikes.
in the middle of June, so that's not so good. Now, the week after this, in August, the Rampage viewership goes up significantly,
Mm-hmm.
and we should point out that that is because this was the return of Charles Montgomery Punk.
Mm-hmm. The not so secret return.
Yes, exactly, and that reflected in the viewership, which was over a million, which was quite shocking, I thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, it wasn't so much shocking as you know, you kind of expected it to be big with Punk showing up and the hype that went into it, which, you know, we talked about in previous podcasts, and we both have slightly different opinions of how they approached that, but like, no doubt about it, it was a success.
Yes.
But yeah, it was a one-off, most definitely.
Yes, because after this we can, well, actually let's do a little more comparison. For comparison, you know, NXT that week 685,000, which again is pretty consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Dynamite 1,172,000. Raw and SmackDown were both over 2 million. TNA, unfortunately, 98,000 that week. Yes, people didn't want to watch TNA. Something else happened that drew their attention, unfortunately. So, like we said, good numbers for AEW that week for both Dynamite and for Rampage. And then after that, we go down on a bit of a sliding scale.
Yep.
So this the rankings I have go up to the end of the week of the 9th.
Okie dokie.
We don't have December 10th to the 16th ratings yet.
No, I've got a sort of the fast national numbers, or whatever you want to call them.
Okay, well, we'll get to that. Perfect. Keep those. We'll get to that in a second. But after Dynamite, where Punk returned, and that, again, you know, we're not taking anything away from that. Everybody wanted to see it. It was a huge deal for wrestling. After that, the ratings went down to 722,000,
Mm-hmm.
which, you know, that's a good 400,000 drop right there, ish.
Yep.
The week after that, 696,000. The week after that, 670,000. The week after that, 642,000. The week after that, 640. Then 622. Then 502. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks in a row where it went down.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got 578. So it goes up. 533. So it was down. 623. So it goes up. 599, 515, 556, 431, and last week 499.
Yep.
So if you have the Fast Nationals for this week or for last week or whatever it is,
yeah.
Let's have a listen.
So it's 483,000, which you know, is probably going to be slightly higher than that, but it's usually not that much higher, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So we're talking close to 500,000.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you look at Rampage since Punk did his business, after that, It went down from 7 down. A couple of weeks later, we're at the 5, and it's been at around about 500,000 for a number of weeks now,
Mm-hmm.
pretty consistently. So that feels to me like classic case of them just not taking advantage of what they had. They had CM Punk coming back, and they knew that all eyes were going to be on them. It reflected in the 1.1 million that they got watching Rampage. And since then, what have they done on Rampage that's made you want to go back and watch it? What classic matches have they been putting up? What storylines have been advanced on that show? What have they put on that show to make you want to watch it other than saying, oh, Punk will be on commentary this week. Oh, Daniel Bryan will be here. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is what we were talking about earlier with the storylines. There's no like, oh my God, I can't believe what just happened. You got to watch Rampage to see how part of this story concludes itself, or what happens next in this massive part of this story. They don't do any of that. They just say, hey, next week on Rampage, Lee Moriarty versus Dante Martin. Here you go. And people go, what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? I don't even know if those guys are feuding or what. Those are just two names I picked up. But like, you know what I mean? It's just they just have names of people, and they go, these guys are fighting each other. And like, well, cool, but why? Like, what's the deal? Then
Mm.
like goes back to what we were talking about with NXT. You can put those good matches on the NXT show, but that's not why people were tuning in. They were like, well, what's going to happen with the heavyweight champion versus contender, or how are they going to set up the next women's championship match, or stuff like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then while you were watching to see that stuff, you got to watch some matches that were really good, right? But
Yeah.
a lot of those matches they didn't explicitly advertise ahead of time because nobody cares, right? That's the stuff. By that I mean nobody's watching. Nobody's going to tune in for that show or for those matches. They're going to tune in to watch those matches because they're good, right?
Right.
But otherwise, you're just going in blind faith that your audience will watch your show because it's your show, and that's what Raw do these days. They just go, "You'll watch Raw because it's Raw. It's the TV show Raw. That it's wrestling. You're gonna love Raw. Just tune in and you're gonna watch it, right? Because they don't do anything on Raw. They don't fucking like we said, the Roman Reigns storyline, that's on SmackDown. So you want to see how that advances on SmackDown. But nothing like that ever happens on Raw. They have 3 hours to kill and do a really shitty job of like killing it.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So there's no real reason for you to watch Raw other than because it's Raw, right? They're banking on the fact that it's Monday Night Raw by the WWE. We've said this before as a criticism of the WWE. They bank on the name being more important than the people on the show, which is no good. You can't rely on the good faith of people to watch your show if there's no reason to watch the show.
No, especially not these days when there's so many different choices elsewhere outside of wrestling for your time. So
Exactly. If you're not giving people the good storylines to tune in, people aren't going to tune in. And I think that reflects with Rampage as well. You can't just say, oh, this is AEW's new show. People are going to watch it because it's AEW. Or conversely, people are going to watch because CM Punk is doing commentary. That's not a storyline. That's not a reason to watch the show.
mm.
There's no must-see TV about that. There's no urgency. There's no hook. You know? Oh.
Well, there was a hook this
Yeah.
week.
I mean, that doesn't count, Tony Khan. That doesn't. You can't just name one of your characters Hook and then go, you see, there is a hook. I mean, there's no like cliffhanger, which is that's what is attractive about a lot of modern day television.
Yeah.
That there's some kind of cliffhanger to make you want to watch the next episode, and it goes more than just, oh, I like this TV show. It's like, well, what is it about the show that you like? It's about the characters, and you want to see how these characters interact next week because part of the plot has advanced to a point where it's going to resolve itself in the next episode or continue itself in the next episode. And you have to see what happens. And that shit's not happening in a lot of wrestling companies. That's not just AEW, and it's not just WWE, but they're the two big ones, and they're the two that aren't following through with a lot of these storylines. It's why, like we said, the Rampage ratings have gone down. But let me really quick go and talk about Raw, since we were slagging off Raw, right?
Mm-hmm.
Beginning of the year, January, the first week of January, they were at 2,128,000, right?
Yeah, although that was an anomaly as well, really, because
Yes,
they hadn't really hit 2 million much
in a
before
long
that
ass time.
since like late August in
Right,
2020.
exactly, because their product isn't. There's no reason to watch Raw, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing big happens on that show. I'm sure, like, fun stuff happens. You know, Drew McIntyre being champion was fun, and Lashley was a fun champion. But they weren't in like epic, interesting storylines. They would just kind of bumble through shit the way Raw always does, right?
Mm.
Evident by the fucking Miz winning the belt and then dropping it to Lashley, right? Shit like that just it's it doesn't matter, right? Like so the week after that it went back to 1,819,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which sounds a bit more accurate. So let's skip all the way to last week, December 3rd to the 9th. The Raw ratings 1,599,000. Now that sounds right about the sweet spot for Raw, really, to me. It feels like they're doing a lot of like 1,500,000 to 1,800,000 ish.
Yeah, but in terms of where they were 2 years ago, pre-pandemic, when they were
Yes,
doing like regularly 2,200,000 or something along those sort of lines, that's at least 600,000 viewers they've lost in 2 years.
that they've lost exactly. And you can try and blame that on the pandemic, but you can also blame it on just not interesting quality programming.
Mm-hmm.
And even like we said earlier at the beginning of the show, these numbers pale in comparison to what they were in the Attitude Era and slightly after that. You know, the WWE the WWE got to the point where they knew that they were big and they were the only game in town, so it didn't matter what they put on TV. And then AEW came along, and the WWE thought it still doesn't matter what we put on TV
Mm.
because we're not losing a huge chunk of their viewership. AEW, like I said, I feel like AEW dropped the ball with not having these compelling storylines. They do a lot, you know, to their credit, they do put on a lot of good matches that people want to see. And to their discredit, they have a lot of, do a surprise announcement next week, which is not compelling storylines.
It's
That's the old,
not?
no, don't play
Yeah.
dumb with me. That's the old Dixie Carter shit. And we know where that went. Because if we look at the ratings for TNA recently, you know, I mentioned some of them, but they're happy to break like 100,000,
Mm.
which is bizarre because YouTube videos get more than 100,000.
Yeah.
You know, like that's just November 19th to 25th. Their ratings were 48,000. That's not good.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And you could say, like we had mentioned earlier, that TNA did some damage at some point in
What
their
date did you
careers.
say that was? Sorry.
That was the week of the 19th to the 25th of November.
So was that Thanksgiving week though? Because if it is Thanksgiving Thursday, then that might explain it.
Yeah, that could do it. Yeah, but you know, there's been other times. I mean, that's an extreme low, but there's definitely been some times with TNA where they're under 100,000.
Hmm.
That happens a lot. They seem to do a pretty like. Hang on, where are we? It's sometime in June they had 69,000,
Yeesh.
I think, which was, you know, not optimal. They
Mm.
do seem to hover around like 150,000,
Hmm.
which is decent. But like again, this is a patch on what it used to be.
It's interesting as well that like obviously AEW kicked open the forbidden door back in well, sort of this time last year. And, you know, there's supposed to be all this crossover between AEW and Impact. And the theory was it would end up helping Impact grow their audience as well.
Yes.
But, I mean, there's just not really any evidence for that, is there?
No, and again, we get the ratings for it. So like I said, it seems like they hover around 150,000 as their their sweet spot, right?
Mm.
Usually that, or slightly below that. So if we look at January, the first week of January, Impact Wrestling are 148,000.
Mm-hmm.
Week after that, 161,000. Then 147, then 186, which I think that had something to do with Kenny Omega turning up.
Yeah.
But then even that, 186 is an increase of like 20,000. You know what I mean? It's not huge numbers. And the week after that, 173. They do 197 on February the 12th to the 18th, and that seems to be like one of their highest numbers. Then after that, they don't get to that at all. However, the week after that is 170, and then after that, 134, 144, 146, 116, 148. These numbers are what we're expecting.
Yeah.
168, 132, 145, 120, 123. Those are, you know what I mean? It's not getting any higher than that. And this is, these are the numbers that are coming out weeks after this Forbidden Door has been open, and Tony Khan's doing his little adverts on TNA Impact and promoting the hell out of this show. And again, you look at what they were in Impact and on AEW Dynamite. This is the point where Dynamite weren't even doing millions. And they were like, well, we can give you extra viewership. Like, well, how? That's funny enough. Once Dynamite started getting a million, they were like, nah, I think our Impact talent swap has finished. But also, I'd like to go back to AEW Dynamite, because let's say the middle of July is when they started getting their regular scheduled programming back again, right?
Yeah.
Remember, they were bumped for a little bit in May and June. But let's say the week of July 8th to the 15th, all right? Dynamite's got 1,025,000 viewers.
Yep.
The week after that, 1,148. So they're hitting a million, but they hit a million for 4 weeks in a row, where it dips down slightly. And then they hit a million, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 weeks in a row again, they're hitting a million. And then in October, they dipped down again. I think they were bumped for that too, were they?
Yeah, the 16th of October and the 23rd, they were on Saturdays, both of those dates.
Yes, so they went down significantly.
Yeah.
They both went down significantly. And since then, they haven't been up over a million.
Yeah, well, I think as well, it's worth pointing out, it was, sort of around the beginning of September and All Out when, we saw the debuts of CM Punk and Bryan Danielson and Adam Cole, and that drew like a lot of added interest and stuff. And All Out as well was like a pay-per-view that was really kind of highly touted coming out of it. Like lots of people were very high on it, and for good reason. It was a really good pay-per-view overall. And so AEW had all that hype and kind of momentum behind them, which is why they were doing all these strong ratings of over a million. But they kind of squandered that a little bit, I think, because the way they've kind of booked CM Punk, like we've talked about it before, it's not been the most exciting way to introduce him back to wrestling audiences again, where he hasn't really had these feuds to sink his teeth into. Like a 2-week feud with Eddie Kingston is essentially just a waste of both guys, really.
Right.
And it's only now that he's doing something with MJF, and it actually feels like it's important and gonna have some weight behind it, that it feels like they're actually doing something with Punk. But it's a bit too late for that now, because whatever hype he had has been kind of squandered with random matches against like Matt Sydal and Bobby Fish and Daniel Garcia and Powerhouse Hobbs, and it's just
Dante Martin.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird situation that they've put themselves in, really.
Exactly. This all goes back to what we were just saying. They didn't have the storylines to capitalize on, and they had huge momentum. Daniel Bryan coming in, Adam Cole coming in, and CM Punk coming in. This should have been way more than just, we got a big announcement, look who's coming in, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't capitalize on that. And the ratings now show that. Now they, for the last close to 2 months, yeah, definitely since October, have been under 1 million. And they had it. They had it above 1 million. They were rocking and rolling. They were in a sweet spot. They were getting consistently above 1 million numbers. And then they got bumped for 2 weeks, and they haven't been able to get those numbers back again. And it's because the storylines they're doing just aren't compelling enough to get people to keep tuning in. Like, they are very good at putting on all sorts of interesting matches with all these people, you know, some of whom you haven't heard of and some of whom you have heard of, but they're not good at getting you to stick around and watch stuff develop, because nothing develops. They have all these green talent that they want to push, but they don't know how to push them, because what are they doing with them? What's like Powerhouse Hobbs, for example, right?
Yeah.
Big guy, intimidating looking guy, could be a great addition to your roster. But what's his storyline? How long's he been there? He's been there months.
Yeah, over a year since he's joined Team Taz. So
Right. But what's the storyline been? Team Taz have had a storyline where they have like 80 people and they don't do anything and never look like a threat. So why would anybody take any of these people seriously? And the answer is they wouldn't. Nobody takes Powerhouse Hobbs seriously when they should. Look at the fucking guy. He's a beast and he can work. But they don't show this shit off. They show it off in 20-minute matches against CM Punk and whoever else and think that shows you how good of a wrestler he is. And like, well, that's not what this is. There's no reason to watch that guy. Right?
Yeah.
If he brings CM Punk to 20 minutes on a one random dinky ass episode of Dynamite, who cares? Nobody. But if Powerhouse Hobbs got into a real, actual storyline with CM Punk and then went 20 minutes with him and made people go, holy shit, he's actually standing up to CM Punk. He could actually win this. That's compelling television. If you just go, next week, Powerhouse Hobbs, who's never won a match except against preliminary talent, is going to fight CM Punk, everybody and their grandmother is going to know who's going to win that match. But if you start up an angle, if you have all the members of Team Taz attacking CM Punk backstage or doing something to cause a rift, a reason for them to fight, and then have Powerhouse Hobbs come in and have Hobbs beat Punk, I know that that's not the angle they were going for because they wanted to keep Punk hot. But I'm like, well, then run the angle with Powerhouse Hobbs when it makes sense for Hobbs to win. Because then you can work a storyline, you can give Punk an out as to why he lost, but also Hobbs would look majorly impressive for beating CM Punk and working a storyline with one of wrestling's biggest stars. But they're not doing that at all. They're doing the opposite.
Part of the reason why they're not doing that is because they've got so many people in that exact same position that Powerhouse Hobbs is in, because they've got such a gigantic roster. There's just not enough genuine TV time to kind of put them all in feuds and stuff, which is why they end up in, random ass stables, and the only TV time they can pretty much get is when they're, involved in outside interference or, jumping someone after a match or things of that nature. So it's like they're sort of limited themselves by having too big of a roster, which is where you think like something like bringing in Rampage would have helped spread the superstars around so they can kind of have more freedom to tell stories and have feuds and stuff. But it's just, I don't know, it's not really materialized that way.
No, it hasn't. You're right. You're exactly right. They have so many people on the show that it's impossible to get all those people on the show unless it's just random ass stinky matches. And that's fine for a couple of people. You can have all of those other people and then have like a handful of guys that you want to push, that you really need to push, and work them with CM Punk. Because what good does it do to CM Punk to go 20 minutes with all these guys that you barely see on TV? It doesn't do him any good. Doesn't make his opponents look any good. They think it does. They think it makes the opponent look good by going 20 minutes with CM Punk, but it doesn't if they don't do anything after that.
But they have, to their credit, they have sort of turned this into a plot point with the MJF feud now, where MJF has called out CM Punk because he's sort of looked like he struggled to beat these guys that, 10 years ago he would have, steamrolled his
But
way
everybody
over.
does that. Kenny Omega will get in there and go 20 minutes with somebody.
This is true, yes.
Daniel Bryan gets in there and goes 20 minutes with somebody. All of these guys who are supposed to be the top guys, Christian Kids will go in there and go 20 minutes with somebody. They all do it. You can't point at CM Punk and go, you're no good, when all the other guys at the top of the card do the exact same thing. Like, that's not clever. If it was only CM Punk doing that and they pointed it out, that would be clever, storyline-wise, right?
Mm.
But because they're all doing it, it's not clever. Again, it's the opposite of clever. It makes the rest of the other people look stupid too. Because then you're like, well, then if CM Punk is an idiot for not being able to put these guys away, and all these other guys are also idiots.
Well, I would say Bryan Danielson has wrestled more shorter matches. His average is more like 10 minutes and 20, and he's been doing it like certainly in this run against all the Dark Order. He's been having matches shorter than that as well, where he's basically just looked quite ruthless and dominating, which is exactly how they should have booked him. Because this builds him up as a solid world title contender. Not that he needed building up, but it plays into the story.
They totally should keep building this guy up. You have to keep presenting him as a legit fucking deal. Because Punk and Daniel Bryan were two of the biggest deals they had coming into the company. So you have to keep making them look strong. But if you look at the Young Bucks, for example, they go 20 minutes with every fucking tag team on that company.
Yep.
To the point where you're like, well, I don't know who the big tag team is. When the Young Bucks were the tag champions, they would go 20 minutes with, or even longer than that, with every single tag team in that company. And they were the tag champions. And that makes them look stupid. It doesn't make your opponents look good for getting all their shit in. It makes them look stupid for not being able to put these people away. It happens all the time in AEW, and they need to be able to organize that shit way better. The time management. If the matches were shorter, they could do more angles and stuff. Like, they're still really reluctant to do a lot of angles and to work stuff like that. They try to do a lot more of that stuff in the ring, but then when they do that, it just means that a lot of the stuff they do is very samey. It's a lot of like somebody has a match and then there's a run-in at the end of it, or somebody has a backstage interview or an interview out in the crowd, and then somebody runs in and beats them up, and these are the storylines, and you're like, well, these aren't storylines. This is just somebody gets beat up and then they have a fight. I'm like, well, this isn't a way to book shit.
Well, it's interesting, though, because we've been obviously quite critical of AEW's booking pretty much since it started. But it almost seems like since NXT 2.0 started, they've kind of taken a page from AEW's book, where it's more of like car crash TV, like lots of characters being introduced and random kind of interactions and stuff, and like nothing really has a chance to breathe on that show anymore. And you look at the ratings and how that's reflected in them, and basically it's been pretty bad. Like, they're regularly doing a lot worse than they were when they were still the black and gold brand or whatever. And it's just it doesn't look like it's kind of had the desired effect, like slap this new coat of paint on the show, and introduce all these new superstars as well. So
yes, I agree with that. I feel like NXT had a really good thing going, and then the WWE thought, no, we'll cut that out, we'll change it, and we'll change it to something else that should hopefully increase viewership, and it's turned more people off. NXT 2.0, as they've dubbed it, isn't interesting anymore. It doesn't have the long, drawn out, like fun storylines that they were building up beforehand. None of that shit's there anymore. Like you said, it seems a little bit more haphazard, and stuff just happens, and you live with it. I don't really like that, and clearly other people don't like that either, and they've just kind of turned off from it.
Yeah,
they're not interested. So you know, well, again, the WWE, god damn it, across the board is gonna be pretty fucking bad at this shit.
Well, I would say aside from SmackDown,
SmackDown,
which
yes,
is the one consistent in all of like the TV ratings over the last, 2 years or so. SmackDown has regularly been hitting over 2 million viewers,
yes,
and hasn't really fluctuated that much at all during that time. So,
right. And again, I can't say that the entire time frame that we're talking has been because of the Roman Reigns storyline, but I dare say, like, it's been going on all this year, right?
hmm
Like I said, the most interesting, the most consistent, the most logical storyline in wrestling at the moment has been this Roman Reigns storyline, and the other companies, including the other offshoots of WWE, haven't been able to get anywhere close to that. And I feel like that does reflect itself in the ratings. Because I have an average. I don't know if you have an average for,
no, no.
but I have an average for all of the companies. So let's go Impact first. We'll talk TNA. Their average for the year so far, and again, there's a couple of weeks to go before the year is over, but we'll call this pretty much definitive, right?
hmm
Shit's not gonna change too much in the last 2 weeks. So their average for the year, 124,000, which isn't
That's
great.
yeah, it's respectable, I'd say, for them on their
Yes,
network and everything as well.
I mean it's solid numbers for them, but it's not a patch on what we're about to hear.
Hmm.
So the Rampage ratings, even though we've said they've been on a decline pretty much since CM Punk turned up,
hmm
they've been on a decline, but they're averaging out roughly because they only came in halfway through the year, averaging out about 629,000, so 630,000 ish.
Yeah, yeah.
NXT averaging out now at about 669,000.
hmm
So not that much ahead of Rampage.
Despite being on a different channel and a different day and a better time slot as well, you could argue.
Yes, and being more established,
Yeah, yeah.
only slightly ahead. And you could imagine that part of that might be because ratings recently have been declining because of NXT 2.0, whatever the fuck that means, right?
hmm
Dynamite 898,000 as an average, so close to 900,000.
Mm.
Which, given that for a while they were doing a million, they're not averaging a million.
Yeah.
Is a shame. Raw, we talk about Raw fluctuating up and down. Sometimes they were just over a million. Like it's patchy as fuck. But they're averaging for the year 1,767,000,
Right.
which is decent.
It's decent, but when you compare it
Yes,
to what it was, it's a
exactly.
bit concerning.
Not what it used to be at all.
Mm.
But they're still over 1,500,000, which is I think that's where they want to be. Anything below that, they're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
SmackDown, conversely, for the average across the whole year, 2,054,000. So over 2 million as an average.
hmm
And like you said, if you look at the tally of SmackDown, pretty consistently, there's a couple of blips here and here. Like again, over in May into June, because whatever the fuck, it must be basketball season then or ice hockey season. There was some kind of sports event going on, wasn't there?
Yeah, yeah.
So in May and June, SmackDown ratings took a bit of a dip underneath 2 million.
But only just underneath. It's still like one
Exactly.
nines or 1883, so it's
Yeah. So
not that
back,
far off.
but in July they're back up again and pretty consistently, except for a few blips.
hmm
So SmackDown seems to be the most consistent show going.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's just because they have the most consistent storyline. Now, my issue with that again is that while that main event storyline is compelling, what other reason do you have to watch SmackDown? They will put the good matches on, but like we really need more consistent storyline with the other divisions as well.
Mm.
Shinsuke Nakamura is the Intercontinental Champion, but you wouldn't know it. Like, what's his storyline? What is the reason to pay attention to the Intercontinental Championship kind of scene? That if they could capitalize on that shit, and they can do it. They're just not doing it.
Yeah.
So like their ratings could be even more interesting if they could stick with this stuff. But I don't know. Like that's my opinion basically. Is that SmackDown is the only show with like any real proper storyline at the moment, and that's a storyline that needs to shift. Like we said, they've been doing the bloodline thing for like a year and a half,
Mm.
and they can't keep that up forever. And they
No,
would be
no.
fools to try and keep it up forever. To be fair, they have done shit like that before, where they try to keep it going forever and it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to need something new and fresh pretty soon, which we'll hopefully see in a couple of weeks. Raw needs a complete overhaul. No point even fucking talking about Raw, because Jesus fuck, like just scrap the whole show. Through it, and we know it's not going to change because the 3 hours makes them too much money.
I was gonna say, yeah.
It's impossible to watch that show.
Yeah.
NXT needs to find the right balance.
Mm.
They can't just put all the new people on the show and go, it's different. Like they need to find a better balance with that. They need to take some of the newer ideas and mix them in with the older stuff they were doing. That's how to get people involved. And AEW, conversely, they need to focus more on the storyline. They're good at the match making, but they need to have compelling reasons to watch that show other than just because it's not WWE. It's not a good reason to watch that show. I need something with more substance than that. And I think that's why people aren't watching Rampage as much, because they don't need to. They can see all they need to see on Dynamite. There's no real special attraction to watch Rampage other than it's more AEW.
Yeah.
They need to. I'm sure they can. I'm pretty sure they can come up with some reason to elevate that show. But at the moment the ratings kind of reflect what we've been saying for a while now. I think in that the storylines need work, but also at the same time across the board ratings seem to be down significantly for every wrestling show.
Yeah, and just in general in terms of TV as well. It's unless you're Tucker Carlson, apparently.
Fuck.
I know, it's pretty scary how many people actually watch that dingbat.
Maybe they could get him on Rampage.
Well, yeah, there you go. That would probably help boost the viewers. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, we should point out, of course, that viewership isn't everything, and people's viewing habits have changed significantly. But also, like, viewership is a really good way to gauge your company, because the viewership, with the advertising rights and stuff, that makes money and that sells to people. And the more eyes on your product, the bigger your product can be, and the more money you make in from advertising, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all just like logical. People who say the ratings don't make a difference, that's not strictly true. I will agree that, like we said, people's viewership habits have changed with the internet and with watching things kind of on demand and whenever you want. But the ratings still have a purpose and a point. And,
yeah,
you shouldn't spend all your time focusing on them, but at the same time, you can't ignore them, because they tell a very telling story. And I think that we can see that with this year's ratings, at least,
Mm-hmm.
So, is there anything else you want to say about this whole sticky situation?
I mean, we didn't really touch anything at all on the whole 18 to 49 demo, which is obviously the big one that Tony Khan likes talking about, and AEW sort of focused a lot of their attention on. But
right. Do you think it's worth talking about, though? Because I feel like, considering that the ratings for AEW are much lower than the WWE's are anyway, for the exception of NXT, but the AEW ratings are so down anyway that to say that they've won the demo rating doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. You know what I mean?
I don't know. It's a weird metric to kind of judge stuff by, I guess, because to most people it means nothing. At least when it comes to viewership, you can see one big number against another, and it's obvious what that is. Whereas a 0.44 or whatever, what the fuck does that mean? So it's a weird one, but obviously it's something that AEW and TNT have put a lot of stock into, and kind of they sort of rely on that to kind of make their bold proclamations about how well they've done and stuff.
Yeah,
And fair play to them, it's
but
an important thing, I guess. But
we kind of covered that in that since AEW started, it seemed to have an audience of like that demo anyway. It was that kind of people, that area of people who were more disenfranchised with the WWE and wanted an alternative, who would watch AEW anyway. Whereas the WWE was kind of more geared towards younger viewers or like their parents or like an older demographic. So that was going to be the demo for both shows anyway.
Yeah.
And so for them to tout that as a success, number one, doesn't make any sense since that was the demo anyway. But number two, would the demos reflect the viewership percentage? So if you have 600,000 people watching AEW and 1 million people watching Raw, for example, to say that the demo is higher in AEW, but that's related to the smaller number.
Yeah.
That's related to the obviously smaller number. The WWE have more viewers and therefore a wider range of people, and therefore the demo is obviously going to be skewed anyway.
Plus,
you know what I mean?
I think Eric Bischoff made a really good point about it as well in terms of the 18 to 49, and like Dynamite does pretty well, but they're essentially running unopposed on a Wednesday night, whereas Mondays, Raw is up against Monday Night Football for a significant chunk of the year. So that is more of a competition for that 18 to 49 demo, which Dynamite doesn't have. And so, of course, that's going to mean that Dynamite gets a big, rise in the demo rating, whereas Raw will suffer a little bit. But again, it's like all relative when it comes to stuff like that. You can't put too much onus on it, I guess.
I think so. I feel like that's really clutching at straws. If that's your big play, like it's like you said, it's inconsequential. It's not just not relevant, but it's not like it's not going to change anything.
Yeah.
But you'll notice that whenever the ratings for AEW are down, they'll tout the demo. Like, our demo is great. I'm like, well, again, it's relative to the people watching it. So if the people watching it are down, but you've got a good demo, then that just means you've lost some viewers outside that demographic.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Tony Khan, numbers guy, But I don't know. So I guess we can wait and see what the ratings will be next year. If wrestling still exists, if society at all still exists by next year.
I mean, the way these coronavirus variants are going on, we're probably going to get wiped out pretty soon. So.
Oh, what a glorious day that'll be.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah, well, that means I won't have to fucking hear about Hook anymore. It turns out there is a God after all. Well, I think that'll wrap today's episode up, will it?
Yep.
I think there's still need to say. Anything you guys want to say about the ratings, whether or not you think they're important, let us know. Or the demo, although I don't think the demo is worth talking about, to be honest. Ridiculous. But the ratings, I think, have a purpose. And if you guys want to chat about that, feel free. Although this is, the numbers are there. They don't lie. But that's going to wrap things up for today's episode. So I think we're going to be back next week with another episode. And make sure to stay subscribed so that you can check that one out. And we shall see you all in the next episode. So goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Good day, fellows. As they say.